Kentucky Republican Senator, that's Rand Paul, joins us now from Capitol Hill. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he supported President Trump's decision to meet with Vladimir Putin. Senator Paul, long time no see. Very good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Listen, you've heard the avalanche of criticism and negativity, appalling, shameful, disgraceful, shocking. It's coming from all sides, and I'm wondering, you're here this morning, you're doing a cleanup on aisle 3?
Well, I think we ought to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and decide whether or not we want to have conversations with even our adversaries. During the height of the Cold War, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy had a direct line to Khrushchev, and I think the world is a safer and a much better place because we had that line of communication. We had ambassadors. Let me finish my question. If you're going to ask questions, let me finish.
All right.
It was also, I think, a good idea that we've continued to have ambassadors and diplomatic relations with Russia, even though they are our adversaries.
Senator Paul, I don't think anybody would object to trying to have a good relationship with Russia. I think the problem is that he seemed to throw the American intelligence community under the bus while doing that. Is there a part of you that wishes? Is there a part of you that wishes?
I think that's incorrect. I think what you just said, that no one would object to him meeting with Putin. Every Democrat on Capitol Hill objected to him meeting with Putin. Every neoconservative and warmonger on the right also objected to it. So yes, the vast majority of the foreign policy community, the bipartisan consensus, said you shouldn't meet with Putin. They also said he shouldn't meet with Kim. And this is an extraordinary thing about President Trump that should be lauded and not belittled, is that he is willing to meet with adversaries to try to prevent us from having World War III.
Senator, you talked about the Cold War history, and one of the things that was distinct about both President Kennedy, you mentioned, and President Reagan was that they did two things. They both met with America's adversaries, and they were quite clear about America's moral view about the repression of both the Soviet Union and then subsequent to that, Russia now, which most people think is led by basically a dictator. What the president didn't do and is getting criticized for is he did not make that moral case. He basically said in the relationship between the two, both sides are at fault. That's the distinction here, not the whether to have the meeting. So what about that moral piece?
But I don't think you're being fair of the president. So when President Reagan met with Gorbachev, do you think he listed the litany of Soviet abuses from Stalin on in a one-to-one meeting? No, they were listed and recounted by other people in the administration. There have also been people within the Trump administration who have listed and recounted the human rights violations in Russia. But we also have to understand that we have to deal with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. And if we're only going to talk to people who have perfect constitutional republics, we're going to have a very small audience, and we're going to have a lot of potential conflict with no outlet for diplomacy. So no, I think the president did a good thing by meeting with Putin, and I think it's a mistake for people to try to turn this into a partisan escapade.
Senator, President Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire. Many of his most famous comments are calling out the Soviet Union on its moral shortcomings. So I think that comparison between President Reagan and President Trump is off a bit. But let me ask you this question. It has also been the tradition for American presidents.
But I'll respond to that. I'll say Reagan also sat down with Gorbachev and didn't call it an evil empire in a press conference with Gorbachev. He also sat down with Gorbachev, and we also had strategic arms limitations. So he actually did. While the rhetoric was strong, you actually might compare that to Trump's rhetoric with North Korea. It's been very strong, but he's been willing to sit down with him. I think there's actually some apt comparisons between Reagan and Trump on the diplomatic front.
The difference here is, Senator, that President Trump is not short about offering criticism to American allies, whether it's on the German gas deal or whether immigration is destroying Europe. But when it comes to Russia, he seems to have, in all instances, whether he's standing next to the Russian president or just quietly by himself in a one-on-one interview, bends over backwards to say nice things about the Russians, and that robs him of an opportunity to make a clear moral case about the distinction between America, which has grown up and had a history of supporting freedom, and the Russian regime, which does not do so. And why not take that opportunity as an American president?
I think what this gets into is that the president has undergone an onslaught of a year and a half of a partisan investigation accusing him of somehow colluding with the Russians. So I think he's sensitive to that. But there's another aspect to the investigation that is a legitimate one, and that is saying, did Russians hack Hillary Clinton's emails? And so there's a legitimate aspect, and then there's a partisan aspect. And we all have now concluded and all understand that the investigation was started by partisans, James Clapper, John Brennan, who started the investigation at the behest of the Clinton campaign, who paid somebody in Russia to come up with a dossier. So really, it's funny that we keep talking about Trump and Russia when, in fact, the only person actually known to pay Russian agents was Hillary Clinton, who paid a British spy, who then paid British agents for dirt on, concocted dirt on Trump.
I know we could go down that road again, but I still think the question remains, does he have to throw the American intelligence community under the bus? I still think that's a big question that people are asking, but we're going to have to leave it there, Senator.
One of the reasons for it is James Clapper's a known liar who's lied to Congress. So
well, so for someone who's for transparency, Senator, a lot of people were outraged that this meeting took place privately. I think that was a lot of concern as well, but we're going to have to leave it there. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you.